Okay, ladies and gentlemen, and folks beyond the binary, good afternoon. It's an auspicious day. It is Sunday. You are tuned into the Spotlight series. I am Zack Ritter. I am Associate Dean of Students at Cal State Dominguez Hills. I'm also an adjunct professor there. Thank you, Joe Brooks, for letting us utilize this space. Joe Brooks is the director of the nonprofit Community Works Institute, communityworksinstitute.org. You got to go check them out. On the website, you'll find professional development opportunities that range from equity and justice issues to creating new curriculum to, doing ethnography, having your students do ethnographies in their own neighborhood. There are institutes that they provide that you will want to look out for. I've taught at some of the institutes. Maybe Cleo will be teaching at some of the institutes. Never know. So we have a special guest. Cleo Thelus. We work together at Harvey Mudd College. We've been friends for, a minute now. We're getting old.
We are.
I'm getting old. You're getting younger, so that's it.
I appreciate that.
So you're a professor at Chaffey College. You are a graduate student manager at the Office of Black Student Affairs at the Claremont colleges. It's for all 5 plus the 2 grad ones. So you're doing a lot, and you're writing a dissertation right now. You're in a PhD. So tell the folks who you are.
Hi, everyone. Well, first, I want to just thank Zack and Joe for having me on. I'm really excited about this conversation that we're going to have today and where it goes. I am from Miami, Florida. I always like to say that because I've been living in California for a very long time, but my heart and my soul is very much rooted in Miami, Florida, and my Haitian Caribbean roots. So I always like to say that. I've been in California for about 7 years. So I moved there in 2014 to start my master's program, then my PhD in applied social psychology, which I'm currently doing research on intersectionality of race and gender and masculinity. So it's been really, really interesting to try to unpack learning more about how masculinity is socially constructed and how that's related to race, and also this idea that manhood is precarious. So it's something that you have to earn. You're just not granted that status by becoming 18. So it involves a lot of social aspects, which would make it really interesting to me as a social psychologist. So I've always been really interested in social issues, and part of why I wanted to start unpacking masculinity more is because of things like the Me Too movement, things like the Stanford swimmer case, things like when Ava DuVernay kind of shone a different type of light on the Central Park, now exonerated Park 5 event. And so I was like, let's see what's going on with this from a social psychology perspective. And as Zack mentioned, I also teach part-time at Chaffey College in their psychology department. So that's always been a really big, exciting part of my journey here in California, teaching college, working with students, learning from students, being able to work in a way where I can transform the way that students think and approach their world and other people by teaching classes, working with students in the student affairs space. So that's how Zack and I met, again, at Harvey Mudd College and at the Office of Black Student Affairs. So that is me, some of me in a nutshell.
We'll excavate some of the other aspects to your professional career. So, all right, I'll do a little bit unorthodox here. So let's jump into the, not peculiar, but precarious.
Precarious.
But
I would say it's both.
Precarious masculinity. So I did some work at University of Redlands in a program with Reggie Robles, if he's listening, called Dudes Understanding Diversity, Ending Stereotypes. And it was various programs to try to chip away at some of the toxic stuff and then help guys be more authentically themselves and healthy and happy. So I was having a conversation with a professor colleague at Dominguez Hills last week. She did her PhD comparing Dennis Rodman to Michael Jordan.
Mm.
And she was interviewing, I think, Black and brown identifying male students. And it was interesting. And I kind of want to like understand from, I mean, you know a lot more about this than I do, but students looking at Dennis Rodman and saying like, dude, that is so constructed, you know, like the nose piercings and like the hair and the tattoos and all the things. He's just trying to get attention. And he's like flirting with gender queerness, but like, you know, maybe that's just to get attention. Whereas there was no discussion of Michael Jordan as a construct of, you know, the tough masculine dude who called himself Black Jesus. But because he's just cool. That's how he is. So I guess my question is like, what's up with construction of masculinity, and why don't we deconstruct it more, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's complicated. So I don't feel as though I have all the answers. And then I do want to like also emphasize that the masculinity that I'm looking at this time is mostly rooted in Western ideals. And so when we go outside of Western ideals, gender and how it's understood and how fluid it is looks very different than the binary that is more mainstream in Western culture. But I would say the reason why we probably don't deconstruct it as much is rooted in that idea of the binary. So it's very Western to be like, there's nothing to deconstruct. It's only this or that, like, you know, whereas if the thinking was a little bit more fluid, you probably wouldn't have this issue of trying to unpack why some people might lean more feminine in some ways or lean more masculine in terms of like expression or other things related to masculinity and femininity. But I also want to add that because Western masculinity or manhood oftentimes is rooted in this idea of like strength that usually is like outward strength or aggression, that if Dennis Rodman was in a space where it's sports and it's supposed to be something that's like very aggressive, very like strong in a sense of like you might push somebody on the court. It's about winning. It's about, you know, being a leader. Then that is going to, in some ways, probably influence people to be more critical because it's like, well, you're an athlete playing basketball, which we understand is supposed to be a man's sport. Then if you don't fit into these other very traditional ideas of expression of masculinity, then it's going to probably stand out more to people in that space than something like music, which is what Michael Jackson did. And music oftentimes allows more creativity because it's like I don't really hear people using gender terms when they're talking about how music makes them feel. Like, I don't know that people use that, like, this song makes me feel very manly. Like, it might remind you of masculine things, but I think that there's more creative space when you're talking about the music space versus the sports space. And so people are going to come to it when they're thinking about how that masculinity is expressed with a little more, I guess, fluidity when you're talking about music versus sports. That's my take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like you said, Michael Jackson, Prince,
Little Richard,
Little Nas X, like
yes,
that's interesting. And
Young
now,
Thug,
right,
Outkast, like,
right,
yeah.
okay. And now you're having some athletes coming out as gay, but I mean, I think from what I've seen, even if you're gay in the NFL or any other, whatever, MLB, there is still an expectation that you have to present as like tough.
Yeah.
You can't show like traditionally whatever femme qualities, which probably goes into how, like you say, Western, whatever, white constructions of masculinity deal with this. But tell us, you told us a little bit about how you got into this and why. So like, tell us more about that. Why?
Why? The general answer to the why is I'm really passionate about social issues and people living, everyone living in a world in which they can freely express and thrive. My way of approaching that work is through training as a social psychologist and using theory and data to talk about what could be changed and how it could be changed. Um, and so that's the why. I was like, I know that this thing matters to me in the general sense. So how do I do this in a way that feels fulfilling to me? And getting my PhD in social psych made sense for me. Now, why this particular topic at this moment is because I'm just so generally interested in, I guess, trying to quote unquote fix the world through a social psychologist lens. Whatever seems to be going on around me at the time is what I'll kind of latch on to. So during the Stanford swimmer case, and for those of you who aren't quite familiar or need a refresher on what that is like around 2016, there was a white man who was a Stanford student who was found sexually assaulting a woman, an unconscious woman behind a dumpster. And so there were witnesses, there were people who basically told the authorities, he was brought to court, and a lot of the rhetoric from the legal level and some of the social outlets, social media outlets where, well, he's such a great swimmer and like his future, we need to be thinking about his future. So, I mean, boys will be boys. He really shouldn't, just give him a slap on his wrist. And I was like, oh, what happened to the person who was victimized? Like, that's an issue. And if anyone should be censored. And so what got me, I found it very problematic, a lot of the rhetoric that I was hearing around it. But while I was trying to choose a first year project to do, which required me to do research and collect primary data, I was like, I want to see how we've been socialized around manhood and masculinity and how that might help to explain why people felt so comfortable on a public level to make comments about boys will be boys and this white man's future instead of really trying to protect this woman, give him consequences, give the Stanford swimmer consequences that felt appropriate, and really unpack that so as to then provide information in places like classrooms and courtrooms that help people to be more fair when they're taking certain processes and thinking about things. So that's really how I got into that. And so my advisor at the time, we had a conversation and he helped me to learn more about precarious manhood theory, which is something that is really rooted in honor cultures. So the scholars who started to look at it were interested in understanding how honor cultures informed aggression. And they took that and kind of looked at it more from the frame of, okay, well, let's look at this from a gendered perspective, because oftentimes the people who uphold these honor cultures are the men in the cultures. And so from there, they developed precarious manhood theory, which took its form in around 2008. And so I looked at it, it made sense to me to try to apply it to what I had questions about. And from there, I knew that I didn't want it to just stop on, at least for me, on how do people perceive other people whose manhood is threatened. And that then influences what kinds of decisions they make around the man's behavior. So just for a little background, precarious manhood theory has three main tenets, which is manhood can be gained. So that's the first one. The second one is manhood can be threatened. And then the third one is, if manhood is threatened, it needs to be restored. And that restoration process usually looks like things like socially observable behaviors like aggression. And
Mm.
so trying to understand more about that, I'm like, okay, well, what if we look at a situation where people witness a man getting insulted or having his manhood threatened, and then they're then asked questions about, well, what do you think about him? Particularly because this man subsequently engages in aggression or like sexual harassment. So the idea is that if we've been socialized in a certain way, understanding that if a man engages, or I'm sorry, has their manhood threatened, they have to restore it, then they're in some sense entitled to restore it. So can that then influence the leniency that we have towards someone who engages in aggression to restore their manhood, particularly sexual aggression? So that's what my first year project was on. But I wanted to look at it more deeply because I'm like, all in my world, in my understanding, all manhood isn't created equally. So when we start making intersections such as race more salient, can that then, and I predict yes, but can that then influence people to be less lenient than they would be for someone like the Stanford swimmer who was a privileged white man going to Stanford?
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of where it's gone. And I want to keep unpacking it because just like I said, I don't believe all manhood is created equally, and that has to do with race. That also has to do with disability. That has to do with the queer community. Like, everyone doesn't subscribe to the same manhood tenets,
Mm.
and everyone isn't treated the same when
Mm.
they engage in what we might think are traditionally masculine behaviors. So it's
Mm.
something that I could keep looking at for a long time.
Yeah, that's brilliant because I'm applying your three-part framework to whiteness or race,
Mhm.
right? To class. And like
Yep.
Americans, our whole thing is like get rich or die trying.
Yeah.
You can attain, I mean, well, depending on who you are, you can attain whiteness,
Mhm.
you can attain riches or class, and then it can be threatened. And
Mhm.
then we are seeing a lot, well, a lot of just human history is what do people do when those identities are threatened? Usually it's violence, uh, organizing to change something, or just weird types of aggression in society based on
Mhm.
race, class, gender, religion, faith, ability, disability. Yeah, that's a good framework. I mean, that's troubling stuff, but yikes. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, so we're gonna get back to this. So
Okay.
quick pivot. So you and I worked in the diversity center at Harvey Mudd College, and we used to have a lot of great conversations about, well, everything, media, race, class,
Mhm.
gender, whatever, right? You used to talk a lot about Miami and kind of like the importance of shaping who Cleo is because of Miami and the time that you grew up there. So, there might be folks listening that like, I don't know, I never went to Miami. I didn't give it much thought. But tell the folks what it meant and what it means to you.
Yeah. So Miami is home. I love Miami. I kind of open talking about it because I really am proud that I was born and raised here. I don't plan on changing my phone number because I still have my Miami area code. So it goes deep. But something that I didn't realize until I moved away from Miami for undergrad. So I went to University of Florida for undergrad, which is 6 hours north of Miami, still in Florida, but just so different than growing up in a space where most of your friends' family is also from the Caribbean. You're hearing all types of languages around you all the time. And so you pick up on it. Like, I haven't held on to it as much as I wanted to, but I was conversational in Spanish before I started moving away um, for undergrad. And then I went to Cleveland after that and then moved to California. But because it's just so embedded in your everyday life. It's just in the energy of the city. And what I love about a lot of people's parents, at least from my generation, I was born in 1990, being from other places, is that they bring those cultural values into the city as well. Cause you're just literally like, you're not so removed from it. So not only did I grow up with some sense of like a Southern culture just because of where Miami is geographically located, I also grew up with like very Caribbean cultural values as well. And not just from my family, but like from my friends' families as well. And that was my norm. Like that was my introduction to the world because again, born and raised here. So I didn't know that I could take it for granted or even didn't really realize that the world was any different until again, I moved away for school at 18. And my shocker was like, wait, like you're from Florida? Like I would meet so many white people from Florida. And I was like, huh? Like, what? I didn't know. So that was like my cultural shock. Because again, not to say that there weren't any white people in Miami, because they were. Which even the block that I lived on growing up, we had an interracial couple. So the husband was Black, the woman was white. Across the street from me, a Dominican family. My family's Haitian. Across the other side of the street, next to the Dominican family, a Black American family, then another Haitian family, then Jamaicans, and then like right next door on the other side of our house was a Filipino family. So like that was literally the block that I grew up on. So again, going to school and being like, you're from Titusville? Like, where's Titusville? And just really not realizing that my norm was so culturally rich until I left. And then something that I think a lot of people don't get to see as often or as early as I did is to see people who were as chocolate as me having the heaviest Spanish accents you've ever heard. And that was like normal to me. One of my like play grandmas from church growing up was from Panama. And so she was about my complexion and could barely speak English. And that was just normal, right? So then when I moved to Cleveland, Ohio, which I love, it has a special place in my heart, but I'm like, whoa, like the world really isn't like this. So I grew up with diversity being important to me and loving it and appreciating it just because I lived it. And so when people talk about diversity being important, I agree, but it's like that was the way that I saw the world and like fell in love with living just because like that's all that I knew. So oftentimes the hardest adjustments for me is if I move to a city where I don't get some sense of what I had become used to growing up. But it also helped me to understand the other end of like, well, you have to understand people's perspectives as well, because everyone didn't grow up like you. So if people say certain things, yeah, there's always a time to correct and a way to correct, but to also just not assume that everyone has had the same upbringing as me, which is why I think it's important to move away from where you've grown up. Because if I continue to feel like the world was like this, I think it would make me less effective as a friend, as someone who does the research that I do, as an educator, because I understand that I come from a place that has really blessed me with a lot culturally. But it helps me to meet people where they are, because I know that everyone didn't have that experience. So even like living near Los Angeles, in Los Angeles County, the way that culture happens in LA, like is still very different, because it is diverse when you look at the numbers, but because Miami blends so much in terms of like all of the cultures, you really come into contact. Like there's a reason that I was conversational in Spanish just by like living here, right? Whereas like I know people who grow up in LA and they're like, I don't know any Spanish. And I'm like, I'm thinking like you should, right? Since there's so many different kinds of cultures here, and like a large Mexican population in LA, but like it doesn't blend in the same way. And so again, I think that's a part of the pride that I have about the city, because I think that that's beautiful and it helps to shape a more well-rounded person when that's just all, not all that you know, but that's a very foundational part of who you are.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I mean, we have K through 20 educators um, in the session. Uh, did you have, so you had the play grandmas, but did
Mhm.
you have K through 12, let's say, teachers that were Black and brown that were like, I don't know, instrumental in your development as a person?
Yes, for sure. So Mr. King was definitely a person who stood out. So I started taking, I think he was probably my first advanced placement course, and it was like American history, I think. Mr. King was a Black man with long locks who went to FAM. So he went to a historically Black college and university. And like you got all of that energy in the classroom. We talked about, I've always really loved music. So he and I would always have conversations about like Nas and like things like that. But like that definitely was influential to me because I knew for a very long time that I wanted to teach, particularly in college, but like having teachers that cultivated a classroom where like they saw, well, they grew, so he grew up in Miami and in the neighborhood that I went to my high school in, but like he made it a point to bring all of that into the space. And so I looked up to him. I really did. I don't think I realized it because I low key had a crush on him. So I was like, this is a crush. But I think part of part of it was like, no, like Mr. King is dope. Like I just love the way he does stuff. Like he was so knowledgeable, and in teaching us in that history course, he also like brought in things that the textbook didn't say. So talking about people being enslaved, talking about how that might show up in our current lives. I remember, and I don't remember a lot from my high school classrooms, but I remember him saying once, like when he was talking about slavery, he was like, and some of your parents go to a job that they don't like, and just so they can make sure that you're fed and you have clothes on your backs, and that's a version of slavery too. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't think about that, but that's deep, like, and that's the type of teacher that he was. Always just trying to be a mentor outside of, the books and things like that. So I definitely feel like he was a part of like how helping me to understand that there's a way to be professional and effective as a teacher, but also bring myself into it and just bring like realness into the space. And students really connect with that more than anything when you're being real. And it doesn't one doesn't have to mean that you forfeit another. And he had a really, really great balance of that. So I think that that was really my first introduction into how that could happen and why it was important.
Damn, damn. Yeah, that's you're a good storyteller. I was visualizing.
He was tall. Everybody had a crush on him though. Everybody had a crush on Mr. King.
I love it. I love it. All right. So then you went to University of Florida.
Hmm.
So was that a big change, transition? I mean, what demographically, psychologically, did you develop your passion for psychology in college? I mean, what was that experience like for you?
It was, so I love UF. I never thought that I would be like such a huge like like, yeah, that was my undergrad, that's my alma mater, but it's such a great school. Because you can find, it's huge, so it's like 50, 60,000 students, so it in and of itself is a city. But then it allows you to kind of find your niche because it is so big. um, and as I had mentioned before, it's a predominantly white institution, so like that is where I probably saw the most white people in my life ever for the
Mm,
first time, was at University of Florida. Um, but what they did a really good job in doing is that some students who they felt would need an extra support system before being thrown into their first fall semester, they had a program for us called AIM, and I forget exactly what it
mm,
stands for, but the students in this program were usually like first gen, like myself, probably like needed an extra push because of like a score on an entrance exam or something like that. And just really like needed a mentor. So you kind of got connected to mentors, other mentors of color who were like third or fourth years. And so that helped, but it still was just like, whoa, when I go to class, I'm literally probably one of two, if that. Because I mean, outside of class, you could find your way, but in class, when I feel like it's usually the most intimidating because you're getting all of this information, it's being like thrown at you very quickly. Yeah, that was kind of difficult. I actually really struggled my first. It was the first fall semester. So summer, that transition period where it was like very very supportive in a sense that like the AIM program set it up that way. But fall, I really struggled because um, I was top of my high school class, gifted student, um, and then like different environment, everything was moving quickly. I had to figure out how to live alone, um, in quotes, because I had like roommates, if you could call it that, but they put me in a temporary triple with two best friends. And that, I don't know why they felt like that was a good idea, but I felt excluded there. And then I'm going to class and I'm feeling excluded there because I'm like one of like two, maybe, in the classroom. And then, yeah, I was like, one time I just had to speak to one of my professors who was a grad student teaching an intro math class. And I was like, yeah, I'm about to fail your class. And I need help. And she sat down with me and really helped. She was a Black woman. And I'm working on I'm a doctoral candidate today, right? So I made it. But, you know, as we're talking about the importance of like, educators who really are invested in students, that is what can come by you just sitting down. Like she sat and she didn't judge me, right? She was just like, I'm a little surprised that you were able to come this far without someone not catching those gaps that you had, but let's sit down and work through this. And she sat down and was like, do we need to go back to this foundation? Because if you don't have that, then you can't get here. And really just invested in me like that. So um, with all of that being said, I was able to find my group of friends and really thrive toward the end of it. But it always was something like I want to see more of me. So I didn't really have a lot of Black professors, and coming from a community that was predominantly Black in Miami and seeing that reflected in the classroom more than not, that was very different too. But I did have a really great experience at University of Florida and was able to get connected to mentors of color and find my niches while I was there.
Wow, that's really dope that you found that. I mean, that
Yeah,
the professor was willing to work with you, and that you actually asked for help, right? Some people are so scared to ask for help, and
I was
sometimes,
scared.
right, and then sometimes met with a lot of judgment, right? You don't know this, you should have learned this, blah, blah, blah. And like
Mhm.
when with me in math, like that was some of the issues with math. I was always, kind of scared of it, but that's really good. You found that mentor, and she helped you through. So okay. Did you like frequent the Equity Justice Center, Diversity Center at UF?
So I wish I would have gone there more. And part of the reason why is because I didn't have a car at the time, but it was like way on the other side. It was called like IBC. Yeah, so the B stands for Black. But I forget what the I and the B are. I'm sorry, the I and the C are for. And it was like this white house that had a bunch of books in it. And every time you went in there, it just felt like family.
Oh,
And someone was always talking about some type of issue or scholar or thing to do on campus that was specifically like centered around Black cultural things. And so it was a dope spot to be in. But between like just not being able to get to it as easily and being really stressed out over school, I just didn't go there as much as I wish I would have. But again, part of what helped, in addition to knowing that that space was there, was enough too. Because I think that when you, even if you can't invest or you haven't found a way to invest as much time in those physical spaces, knowing that it's there, if you absolutely just needed to kind of take a break and sit, which I would do from time to time,
Mm.
or that the school was at least thinking, hey, these students need something for them and them alone, that is helpful too, even if you don't get to take full advantage. So if you are thinking about going to a school, ask those questions. Like, do you all have spaces, like equity spaces, cultural spaces? Because I think that says a lot about the school in and of itself, if they have that in place or if they're working on that, because they're already thinking about things that should have been thought about and giving you resources that you should have. I also ended up doing Mcnair Scholars. So that was also a place for me where I kind of had that tight knit community, and a lot of us were first gen people of color as well, and then we got mentorship as like Mcnair Scholars through the program of other graduate students, who oftentimes shared our same identities. So I was getting those things in other places. So, and that's why I say I like UF a lot, because there are multiple ways for you to get what you need. And then you figure out how you want to make that happen. But to your point, sometimes people are scared to ask, or they don't know what they should ask for. And I think that can always be improved, where students shouldn't learn about things by happenstance. And I actually learned about the Mcnair Scholars Program by happenstance. And I was like, I wish I would have known sooner. But I was having a conversation with one of my friends who was already in the program at UF. And she was like, oh, the way you're talking, you need to sign up for this thing. And I was like, oh, really? And so she forwarded the information to me. I signed up, got interviewed. The rest is history. But I had started a year later than I could have, which means that I couldn't get all of the benefits that I could have gotten because I had found out about it later. So I think sometimes it's the information dissemination could be a lot better. And also, it's, as educators, we're busy, but sometimes asking proactively if students want to or need something. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll tell students, like, I'll stay after class, like if you want to come talk to me about anything. And that still can make a nervous student not come up to you, but sometimes students aren't. I waited until I was failing. So I think what really got me to talk was the fear that, oh my gosh, my parents didn't even want me to come up here anyway, and now I'm failing out of, well, I wasn't failing out, but I was going to fail a class. So I think the fear really pushed me, but sometimes just making sure that the way that you interact and create your space as an educator, it really makes students super comfortable with just talking to you about anything that they need to. And so, like, referencing Mr. King again, the way he was so approachable helped us to be able to talk with him about other things too.
Did you know McNair was Black?
I did. Dr. Ronald E. McNair. Yep.
Yeah.
He was an astronaut. Yeah, we had to know that. Like, they were not about to let us in the program claiming Mcnair Scholars if we did not know the history. So yeah, we definitely, that was not an option. But I'm glad, because again, it speaks to like seeing people who look like you and knowing that, if you desire this thing, someone went before you. Lean on that understand that you have power in that. So yeah, I appreciate that experience a lot. I made some lifelong friends through my UF Mcnair program.
So now you work at the Office of Black Student Affairs at the Claremont Colleges. Tell us what that's like. tell us some of the challenges that y'all are facing due to COVID, due to regular old racism, all the things. What's happening?
Yeah. First of all, I love working there. So I think it's so difficult to find a workplace that really allows you to be fully who you are, and then is proactive about your growth as a person and a professional. I think sometimes places forget that professionals are also people. Um, so I just want to lead with that. And I've worked with some awesome people there, and I still do work with some awesome people there, some of which Zach. But yeah, like
Daly. How can we forget Nick Daly?
no, Nick Daly, Dr. Latrice Cox, Lydia Middleton, just awesome people. And then the students that I co-work with, like it's just an amazing space. So with that being said, what has been really interesting navigating throughout the years of working there is that within the Black community, it is so diverse, right? And so I mentioned earlier my Caribbean roots. The Caribbean is huge, right? Haiti is just one part of it. And so making sure that students really feel like their identities are celebrated in the same way that other identities are celebrated. So you have Black American students, you have Caribbean students, you have African students who were born in the US. So African American in a very different way than people whose background involves kidnapping and being brought here, right? So understanding that, and Africa is a continent. So now you got all of that you have to really be mindful of when you're creating programming and interacting with students. Then you have students who are international and Black. So like not, parents were born here and I'm first generation here. It's like, nope, I'm straight from Jamaica and I came here. So I'm just Caribbean. Like I'm not Jamaican American, I am Jamaican, right? Or like those students who are international and like from an African country in that sense. So like came straight to the US from the continent just to study. And it really requires you to sit down with students and talk to them about who they are and what they need and not assume. And I think that our dean and director at the office did a really great job of doing that when she first was hired, was like, what are the Black student groups across the colleges? I want to meet with all of the leadership, see what's going on, see what you need, see how we fit in so that we're working collaboratively. And sometimes students don't want to work collaboratively with you, and that's okay, because there are histories of how they might have had relationships with these offices before you got there. And be respectful of that, still try to create healing around that, because you want to be a resource and they deserve to have access to the resources, even if they are navigating some, hurt and things that shouldn't have happened in the past. But really understanding that you got to take a defensive approach when you're trying to build a space in programming that's really for the students. I think sometimes, I'm sorry, not defensive, offensive approach. Because sometimes I think we can get wrapped up in like, well, this would be really great to do. I have a great idea. And then the students are like, oh, we don't want this. Like, this doesn't make me feel like I'm seen. And it's like, well, wait, it's about this, it's about that. Like, look at what's going on in the world. We're trying to, really speak to that. And they're like, we don't want, and it's literally as simple and difficult as just taking the offensive approach and being like, hey, can we talk? And then unpacking from there and seeing how you can fit the programming in. And that has been an ongoing process because every so often, as much as you try, you have a student or two who's like, I feel like you don't do enough for this part of the diaspora. And it's never like, well, you should have been like, because it's easy to get like that, right? Because you put in hard work too, trying to serve the students who should be benefiting from your office and its services. But what I've really learned, particularly from watching the dean and director, is like, if a student ever feels that way, invite them to meet with you, and then invite them to help work on a program in the future, so that it can really have those aspects and those details that we might have missed. So invite them to collaborate very intimately on projects. So, and I think that that's the best way to approach anything, especially if you are trying to create a service that's supposed to provide what a person wants and needs. Get their input, but get it on the front end whenever you can. I think sometimes we get it on the back end and people are already made upset, and you have to learn how to work through that and mend through that. And we try as we can, but that's definitely been some of the challenges working with students in that sense, is that we really want to show up for them and sometimes we miss the mark, but this is how we try to rectify that. With the it looks like you had a question.
I always have questions, but go ahead.
Yeah, so the other thing you were saying, the difficulties navigating the pandemic in the virtual space. One of the biggest things that our office tries to do is provide community. And it's hard to do that when we can't do our beginning of the year retreat with our mentors and our mentees, where they meet each other, get to know each other, build that relationship through doing activities together in person, particularly students who are incoming first years. It's really, really hard because it's like, that's the moment where it's like, okay, we're starting you off with this sense of community, and then from there, you could continue to build on that or go outward. But it's hard to figure out who is starting for the first time, like at the colleges, how to reach out to them, how to make them feel like this is something that they could benefit from if they're not physically able to go into the space and feel the energy and see the pictures from past events in that way. You try to post, but it's been challenging to do that and then keep people engaged, because we try to do things over Zoom, and we have, but everyone is kind of Zoom fatigued at some point. And so trying to find that balance where you want to create this space so students can be invited into community, but also, like, instead of trying to make it what would have been 2 hours in person, how do we make it one? Because we don't want to lose people, or we don't want people to be tired before they get there and decide, I'm not going to do this. So I think that was one of our biggest challenges, was trying to, particularly for students who were just beginning at the colleges, to figure out who those were. So contacting schools and their listservs and trying to get that information, but someone always gets lost in that sauce. But like, when you're on the ground and someone comes to your office, it's like, if you see anybody else in your class, like, let them know for this, it's a little easier in a sense of like really reaching out to those students who just might not be getting that information. Like I was saying, the information dissemination thing. And so OBSA started to do this ambassador thing where students at each college would get incentivized for basically like, figure where are the Black students. At any time you see one on Zoom in your class and like you say, hey, there's this office that you might want to look into, they would get incentivized. So we basically made use of like students already being in spaces because they were in classes or whatever else, and kind of like being on the lookout for us. And that worked pretty well, but it was still a challenge. Yeah.
I like that. Hey, you should go to the center.
Exactly.
So I'm reminiscing on some of the challenges that you and I and our team face in the diversity center that we worked at Harvey Mudd College. And I think we had that approach where if there are students that are protesting, are unhappy with the institution, are calling the schools, not only Harvey Mudd, but Claremont College's white supremacy institutions, how do we listen to them and incorporate their ideas, but also have them be part of the decision-making process and form a team with them and hire them and, you know, get them literally on the team and on the books.
Yeah, you did a great job at that.
Well, thank you for saying that. I remember taking that vote that we all did, and I was like, woo, I mean, this is going to be unpopular, but I knew in my gut it was like the right thing to do. And so you all pushed me to do the right thing. So I appreciate you for doing that and for standing up to folks in authority that had a short-sightedness, right? And didn't see the vision that we saw of really building that beloved community and trying to heal old wounds at the institution and then move forward together. But I think this is a story told too often at many institutions where there's a way we do things, don't rock the boat. This is you're gonna lose us money, you're gonna lose us, you know, you're gonna piss off the trustees. But conversely, I've seen at other institutions where they've gotten some of the more progressive trustees and they got some of the student protesters and they put them in a room together and beautiful magic happened, like beautiful policy happened. It's not magic, like it really took shape. And some people that were inhibiting that progress were, a light was shown on them and they had to leave the institution. So there's different ways to cut that pie. But Chafee, I don't want to say Chafee versus the Claremont colleges, but when you and I were at the Claremont colleges and you are still there, there was this notion that it is very elite. It is like the Harvard of the West, right? But for a lot of students going there, it's like, ooh, this place is oppressive. You know, this is like really, the culture is too moneyed, too white, too exclusive, so on and so forth. Tell the folks what are some of the challenges and differences between the Claremont colleges and Chafee that you see?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in you asking about the challenges with OBSA, just kind of like overhead type of thing that I didn't get a chance to touch on. It's related to how I'm going to answer this Chafee question is funding. And I think that, well, OBSA doesn't get as much funding as they should. And I very much believe that that's related to other cultural things that the office is supposed to be doing. But then it's like, oh, we're doing this thing that we're hired to do. So why isn't that making you want to give us the funding that we need? So, which is similar to some of the things that happened at Harvey Mudd, but the community college population, I think, particularly with Chafee, there's a whole, like there is more than one office where they understand who they're serving in terms of like people who might need extra support with food. Like there's a food pantry and it's very well supported for the most part, right? Through the school. Like there's an initiative through the school. And when COVID hit, that continued. They found a way to continue to provide students with food or helping them to understand that there are social services that they could be looking into if they needed it and like providing numbers and things like that. I think that with the Claremont colleges, because they're supposed to be so elite, there's this assumption that every student who goes there might not need extra support outside of, you know, academics. And so when those things are brought to the forefront, they don't get as much attention, they don't get adequate funding, or they just don't happen at all. And so I would say that's the biggest difference that I see, is that Chafee understands almost basically every student who is at their school, because you have parents, right? So you have working students that are a significant population at the community college, and there's a daycare on campus. So in between classes, you can take your child to daycare, and then after class, you can pick your child up. And I enjoy that so much, because I had a student one semester who that's exactly what she did before our class. And she would always um, find ways to connect things with her child with what she was learning. And so I just loved hearing her examples about, like, oh, this reminds me of when my son does this. So like, I love the idea that you have so many different types of students, but the special populations office, so students who might have disability, all of that, like where the disability office, and I have not taught at the Claremont colleges, but the disability office has contacted me several times, right? Like way before the semester starts. And it's like, you're going to have a student in your class who needs XYZ. So start setting up for that. And again, I love that. We got another email for something regarding students being able to have access to sign up for classes late, because some students just can't sign up until they get internet or a computer, and then figuring out ways to make that process easier for them. But I feel like for the most part, and no institution is perfect, but for the most part, Chafee does a really, really good job of finding ways to put the money where it should go, where like students need it. And then having offices in place that specifically speak to almost every need that a student might have. And then encouraging employees to attend these workshops and these trainings that can go toward their professional development hours. So it's not like, do this if you want to. It's like, oh no, like if you go, you can get incentivized. So it also, if you're an educator, I feel like you should already want to educate yourself so that you're better able to connect with and create this a safe, brave space for your students. But if you need that extra motivation, because sometimes, if you're not full-time, adjuncts get exploited too. You need extra motivation to do extra on top of what your work assignment is. And I think that they do a good job at doing that as well. Whereas again, Claremont kind of assumes that they have this one type of student. And then if anything kind of goes against that belief, then it's not supported, it's thrown out, it's not funded, because this idea of the typical student is something that they take pride in. Their version, right, of a typical student. They take pride in that. And so when that gets complicated for them, it's almost like they don't know what to do, or they just don't do what they should to address it appropriately.
You're being kind. Yeah, that's
I am being very kind. But I hope I got at it well enough.
No, it's great. It's great. Look, so okay, so we're running out of time, and I have a lot to ask you, but okay. All right, look, I don't want to put you on the spot, because I'm Jewish, and so whenever things pop off, people are like, what's going on in Israel, Palestine? So, but I want to, give you the opportunity. I know being Haitian American is a big part of your identity. There's a lot of stuff popping off in not only Haiti, but also Cuba. You can pass on it, but do you want to say anything about what's going on in the news with those two countries?
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that. So again, growing up in Miami, I've had contact with a large part of the Cuban population in the US. And it's it's complicated times. I feel like the U.S. the U.S. has a very interesting relationship with Cuba and Haiti.
Being kind.
I mean, exactly, like stop being so kind.
Definitely kind.
And oftentimes, the U.S. has been more favorable to Cuba and its needs than to Haiti and its needs. And the U.S. has had a lot of hand in exploiting Haiti and creating the poverty that we now see in Haiti today. So, with all of the complications, with the president being assassinated and the aid that's needed, the leadership that needs to be set in place, I believe that the U.S. should definitely be the quickest to run and help. Um, you're not seeing that. You're seeing more attention, at least regionally, in Miami, being put toward Cuban protests. And like I had mentioned before, social issues are important to me. So I want everyone to thrive, and I want it to look equitable. And it just has never been. So it's difficult. It's complicated. It has been for a very long time, particularly in Haiti with the politics and people supporting certain presidents for certain reasons and not supporting presidents for others. But what we do know is that Haiti needs help, and the U.S. should definitely be helping more than what I've seen, which I haven't seen any help thus far, particularly for this presidential assassination situation.
Well,
Um,
and it looks like some of the guys who assassinated were training in Miami.
oh yeah, there's a connection to Miami. I mean, Haiti is what, maybe a 30 to hour minute plane ride. So yeah, there are definitely connections in Miami and other countries. I've heard of other countries in Latin America that might be connected to this whole thing. So it's still under investigation. Um, but yeah, my main concern is that people are safe and getting what they need, and that things are being put in place to make sure that there's a structure in place. Because right now there really isn't one, and that just adds to the chaos.
Mm. And we were talking about, well, we didn't name it, but Bonilla Silva talks about that hierarchy, right, that we see not only in America but other places. And
Mm-hmm.
Bonilla Silva is saying that, kind of like you're talking about precarious manhood, precarious, racehood,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
Cubans, some Cubans, right? I mean, there's Afro Cubans, there's
Mm-hmm.
Latinx Cubans, or like, yeah. But then there's more like, so there's brown Cubans, and then there's more like, in America, white passing Cubans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
think proximity to whiteness, proximity to money allows you certain political benefits and other kind of goodies that come with that. And I think, yeah, Papa Doc, Baby Doc, some of the American intervention in Haiti, and also just some of the hatred. Like it's one island, and on one side you have like, Dominican Republic, which are lighter skinned folks passing laws of criminalizing Haitian dark skinned folks, and hating on the west side of the island, which is Haiti. So there's a lot of colorism, I guess is what I'm trying to
Oh
say.
yeah. Oh.
In, right, the Caribbean, but also obviously in America. But
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's opening up a whole other conversation, because colorism, in the sense that you're viewing people physically, right? Their physical attributes, but it's also mental, because as lighter skinned as Dominican Republic is to Haiti, theoretically, you still have very dark skinned Dominicans who have internalized this idea of being white or lighter, right? Even though, and it's like, for some of them, if you tell them, yeah, you're a Black person, like I am Dominican, right? Like that supersedes anything else because that identity is rooted in this idea of whiteness. And most of the time, because we carry multiple identities, most people will opt to operate in their privileged identity more than anything.
Mhm.
And that's where it goes. So it's also psychological. So it gets really, really deep where it's like some of y'all actually don't fit. It's like you're saying we don't want these people here, but you are these people. If you really, looked at the reality.
Yeah, well, folks don't like realities, but
Mhm.
Trujillo, that was like the dictator, right? In Dominican Republic, wasn't one of his big things levantar la raza, which is like raise up the race by
Mhm.
marrying someone who's lighter skinned, so
Mhm.
your kids will be whiter, right? It's like, yo,
Yeah, and it's unfortunately not limited to the Caribbean. It's a huge problem in the Caribbean, but we see that in any place that has been colonized
mm,
where white people put in this structure of whiteness being
mm,
superior,
mm,
people hold on to that and they try to perpetuate that in any way that they can. Um, so yeah, it's a big problem, but it's very much, in my opinion, a psychological problem
mhm.
um, at its foundation. Like if up here, um, what did Marcus Garvey say? Take the kinks out of your mind, right? Like he's trying to take the kinks out of your hair, take it out of your mind. So, and Bob Marley said, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. Like that's really all where it's starting. So, until people understand that you have to divest from whiteness and white supremacy, we're going to continue to have a lot of problems.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. And look, was it Coolidge, President Coolidge deported Marcus Garvey to Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
on some trumped up BS of like mail postage fraud or something like that. They said he blah 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 because he was trying to make he was trying to do that the Black Star line. Well, it wasn't a cruise, but like a ship to take folks,
Mm-hmm.
West Africa,
Yeah.
right? Black folks, and I guess the U.S. saw this as a threat, and I mean, there's so much. My friend was saying that part of like the rise of Rastafarianism or
Mm-hmm.
Rastafari is, which obviously connects to Ethiopia, and Rastafari is the name of Haile Selassie, but that Marcus Garvey's presence in Jamaica, like revitalized this kind of like anti-colonial, anti-British, like
Mm-hmm.
remembering the roots and decolonizing.
Yeah. And it's like people pay attention to that, right? Like if decolonization wasn't really going to free people, why then would it feel like such a threat to people
mm,
to the point where it's like, oh, we have to deport you. We have to, dismantle the Black Panther Party. We have to, do all of these things that will stop the
mm,
progress
mhm,
of the freedom
mhm,
that will really allow people to thrive.
mhm,
So it's just, yeah. So to your point, right? If you can get people to subscribe
mm,
to and internalize whiteness
mhm,
and keep them from decolonialization,
mhm.
then you're going to see what you see when Dominicans are like, hey, we need you out of here. When, you know, certain types of Cubans who look a certain way are only allowed into the US, um, and others aren't. So, like, yeah. And
Mhm.
then you see that perpetuated in the other institutions.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the work that we do is teaching everybody to try to
Mhm.
divest from colonial thought, from toxic whiteness thought. And I think for a lot of folks that are proximate to whiteness or have heavily bought into, again, for folks listening, whiteness is not necessarily, is not limited to the color of your skin. It's a like colonial mindset of how to treat other people in relationships, that can be power hoarding, can be very hurtful to yourself and others. Um, and if folks are interested, White Supremacy Culture by Jones and Okun, 2001, check it out. It's a list of 12 different, basically bullet points of paternalism, right to comfort, all these things that are practiced every day in society. It's a culture of whiteness. So you can be a white person and defect from whiteness. You don't have to buy into it. But I think it's like the James Baldwin quote, like if that person only knows that and you tell them that's not good for humanity, then it's like, well, what else do I have?
Mm-hmm.
And then it messes with people's identity, and then they have to deal with other people's pain and their own pain, and people are not so excited to do that. And I think the challenge that a lot of us educators have, of all different races, right? Everybody has a place in this struggle, in this revolution, is how are we going to teach people to be healthier to themselves and others? And if you are uncomfortable with calling that whiteness, call it something else, right? You can call it something else, and that's okay, as long as you understand that we need to divest from these really, really toxic things that are perpetuated in society. And, people are like lonely and they're depressed, and someone just shot up the baseball like all-star
Yeah,
game,
I saw that. It's super sad.
which goes into your masculinity thing, right? I'm not
Mhm.
seeing, I mean, I'm not hating on men, but like, I'm not seeing a lot of women picking up guns and going out and shooting folks. I mean, definitely not at the rate that men are. And so we have to interrogate what's going on with men. Okay, it's mostly white men that are doing it. What's going on with white men? It's white teenagers. What's going on with the socialization, so there's a lot to think about. But as we wrap up, like, this is a lot of heavy stuff,
Yeah.
and you and I and a lot of educators that are listening grapple with historical traumas, with current day traumas. And a lot of my friends have found it difficult putting one foot in front of the other, especially during pandemic, because you don't have those outlets of friends and family and loved ones and so on and so forth. For folks listening, I mean, you seem like you are living your best life, right? So how do you have deal with the heaviness and the weight, but still remain like whatever, hopeful, optimistic, light, loving? How do you do that?
Thank you for saying that I seem like I'm living my best life. I appreciate that. I try to, because number one is understanding that I deserve to live my best life and a full life. And so how do I still contribute to the world that I want to see, but also contribute to giving myself what I deserve? And so, which is interconnected with doing work to see, to see the world that I want to see. But knowing that I need to take a break is knowing that I deserve to feel rested. I deserve to to kind of allow myself to process. I think sometimes people are like, oh no, but this has to be done, and this has to be done, and this has to be done. And there is a lot of urgency, but you can't bring your best fight to what's going on if you haven't taken care of yourself. And so sleeping, eating foods that are good for me, going into nature. I try to meditate every morning. So that's important to me. Doing meditations every morning, saying affirmations, going into nature, literally like going by the water and just sitting there. I love going to the beach. Um, and I love sitting in nature because it's a way that I kind of can take this load off and then view it differently,
Mm.
right? Because even though it is a burden, it's a burden that I feel is important, and then I get to work on something that I feel is important. So I'm reframing that. Everybody doesn't get to do the work that I do. They might want to, but I'm in a privileged place to be able to do that. So understanding to be thankful for that, so that I take care of that gift too. Like, that is a gift. And I need to honor that gift. I need to honor myself because I am a gift. But definitely, like, understanding that requires me to understand that I deserve it. So I would say start there. You deserve to live a full life. For me, family is important. So making sure that I somehow see them and sit with them and get reminded that there's a life outside of academia. There's a life outside of higher ed, because sometimes we could get wrapped up in that and lose sight. But seeing my 5-month-old niece can bring me back into a space where I'm like, oh yeah, like, this is important too. And that could be healing, right? Just to sit with her, hold her. So as I'm, I guess, taking punches along the way, I'm finding ways to heal myself just as much or even more on a journey. And so those are the things that help me to do that.
Damn. I'm taking mental notes because
I wasn't trying to be super deep, but I mean, healing is very important. It's important to me, but it's important to allowing yourself to live your full life. But if you're taking punches constantly and you're not healing, like, you should be healing just as much or more than you're getting punched up and beat up by all of this, whatever it is. Because life will throw things at you.
Yeah, you got to coin that. Your punch to heal ratio, if that's off,
Yeah.
you're
If it's out of balance, you're gonna be out of balance. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, look, this was beautiful. I love seeing you again. This is special.
Same.
Good. So look, I'll close out for the people and then hang out for a couple minutes and we'll just talk offline. But
Okay.
Audience, folks, beautiful people out there, thank you for tuning in. This is the Spotlight series on Sunday. Remember, Joe Brooks does the Friday Spotlight series. I'm Zack Ritter. I'm Associate Dean of Students at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Come check us out. We're in Compton, Carson, on your way to Long Beach. This has been fun. Cleo, man, this has been great. Wait, but I have to say more about, so go check out communityworksinstitute.org for trainings, for professional development, for different institutes that we put on. And you know, if money is an issue, we can work with you. And you know, Joe Brooks and I are about equitable. If we're about equity and race, class, gender, we got to be equitable with the business side of things. So we want people to learn. We want to have students learn about their neighborhoods, and we give students, you know, a camera and a pen and a pad and send them out into the neighborhood, supervise, you know, if they're young folks, don't worry, and really understanding how their neighborhood works, what motivates people, what do they want to be when they grow up. I'm still trying to figure it out, you know, where if I ever grow up. But no, check out CWI. Cleo, dude, this was really special. I appreciate you.
So wonderful. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. Y'all are doing some really great work.
Thank you, appreciate you. All right, Joe. Thank you, Joe Brooks, as well. Appreciate you, man.